A man and his son were traveling with a donkey, and as they walked, people criticized them for not riding the donkey. So the son climbed on, and then further down the road, people criticized the son for making his father walk. So then the father climbed on, and then still more people criticized them both for overburdening the donkey. So then they both got off, and then finally, trying to satisfy everyone, they carried the donkey, and they looked completely ridiculous. So let's get into it. Welcome to Crossroads and Catalyst. I'm your host, Shanita B. This is where we explore how a thoughtful, wise, and strategic perspective at life's crossroads can become the catalyst for meaningful change in your leadership and the direction of your life. So if you don't know what we're talking about based on that story, let me help you out a little bit. It's about people pleasing. And a lot of leaders struggle with it every day and oftentimes don't even realize that that's what's happening. The lesson here is very simple. When you try to please everyone, you eventually lose your way, and no one is ultimately pleased. And then sometimes you're losing your dignity in the process. So trying to satisfy everyone is an impossible, and might I add, a terrible leadership strategy. But there are many leaders who do the exact same thing every day. You're saying yes to every request. You're adjusting to every opinion. You're accommodating every demand as if that's actually possible. And before long, you're exhausted, overwhelmed, and you're wondering why leadership feels so hard. But many leaders are carrying the donkeys every day. And so before we move any further into this content, if you've been carrying everyone else's expectations while neglecting your own goals, I definitely want to invite you to my webinar, She Leads Her Money. People pleasing does not just show up in leadership. Okay. It shows up in your finances and in your priorities. And it also shows up in the way that you manage your resources. And so in this webinar, we're going to talk about the ways to help you take control of your money and make decisions that align with your goals. Okay. And not everyone else's expectations. So you can find the registration link in the show notes. And if you're enjoying the conversations that we have about leadership, confidence, and personal growth, make sure that you follow the podcast so that you never miss an episode. Okay, so the crossroads here is not simply that leaders are busy. Okay, everybody is busy when they're at work, everybody is busy when they're at home. We just live in that type of period right now. But the problem is that you're getting stuck in a cycle, you're getting trapped in a cycle. And what you're finding yourself doing is saying yes because you don't want to disappoint other people. And so then when you do that, you start to become overloaded, and then your own priorities suffer. They actually get shifted out of the way oftentimes. And so then you have some resentment that's building up. And then ultimately your performance declines. And if we don't already know, that causes a whole lot of anxiety, stress, and frustration. And so then you're starting to feel guilty because now you're feeling resentful. And then what happens? Someone else comes along and asks you to do something, and you start that cycle all over again. But let me explain something to you, okay? Many leaders do not even realize that they're experiencing people pleasing. And part of the reason is because you're thinking about it in a different way. You call it being a team player. Okay. I'm just doing what I can to help to support the team. Or you're just being dependable. You're calling it being helpful and accessible or even responsive. And all of those sound really grand. Okay. It sounds like you are, hey, I'm here for the team and I'm helping to support everyone. But let me ask you a question. At what point does being helpful become self-sacrifice? Okay, because you're sacrificing yourself at the altar of yes and at the expense of your own strategic focus and your well being. There are definitely some hidden costs when you do this. Okay, you're going to eventually experience burnout because you're not prioritizing your own work and your own well being. And then what about decision fatigue? That is not just some pop psychology or popular phrase that people are using now. That is a real thing. When you get to a point to where even the smallest decision is stressing you out or causing you to crash out, well, then you know you've got something else that is causing some issues in your life. Okay. And then, of course, another cost is that you have this constant overwhelm. And all of these things are putting pressure upon you. And so then your confidence starts to fade. And then you're questioning yourself. You're even losing your personal time because you're so focused on trying to get all of these commitments fulfilled that you can't stay focused. And you don't even have the time that you need personally to take care of your own business. And so those are just the costs that impact you as a leader. There are also costs to the team, okay? Because if everything is coming through you, well, then it's likely that you're a bottleneck because you have put on more than you really have the capacity to complete. You're causing issues with your team, so they can't get things done. They're waiting for you because you're the one who has the authority, and it's causing some issues. So then this also leads into a lack of accountability. And how is that? Well, who's going to question you regarding everything that you've put on your plate and everything that you might be holding up, unless it's your boss? And so now you've just caused some confusion with taking on these additional tasks. And now it has you in a compromised position. Okay. And so then let's even talk about costs to the greater organization, because it's not just the leader, you as the leader, it's not just your team. It could also be your organization that's going to suffer as a result because you don't really have the time to focus on the strategic work like you need to. That is being neglected. Okay. You don't have the opportunity nor the time to develop your team. And if you are the solution to every problem, well, then there's a wider issue at play here because you're the go to for everything. And that is not sustainable. It's not even practical. Okay. So while people pleasing is often described as a personality trait, some psychologists and therapists suggest that it's also a learned coping strategy. Okay. People pleasing may actually be a survival strategy for a lot of people. And you may be one of them. Okay. Maybe you learned very early that approval creates safety and conflict created discomfort. And so you wanted to avoid that discomfort at all costs. Maybe you also learned that being helpful earned acceptance. People were welcoming of you because they knew that you would be helpful, even to your detriment. And then meeting other people's needs reduced tension. So if you were brought up in an environment where that was the case, well, now it's a pattern and it becomes automatic for you to acquiesce to other people's requests and even their demands. And so then your nervous system is triggered and it begins to treat disagreement as danger, disappointment as danger, even criticism and rejection as danger. And this is not even because those situations are dangerous, but because they feel dangerous, because this is the environment that is shaped how you respond to certain things. And so sometimes we're not just saying yes because we want to. We're saying yes because our brain has learned that saying no feels unsafe, right? And so people pleasing, again, can be learned very early, but it's not always based on what we learned as a child. Okay. Sometimes we're developing this people pleasing because there are some other things that are going on. Maybe you've experienced some imposter syndrome. And I just recently did an episode on imposter syndrome. So I will definitely link that in the notes for you. You should check that out. But that's a real thing as well. Okay. When you're thinking, that you have to prove your value because I don't want people to think that I don't belong here. I don't want them to know what I think even about myself. That is a common thing, especially if you're in a new role and you really feel like the weight of the world is on your shoulders and that you have to prove to everyone around you that you belong where you are. First, let me clear it up. If you got the job, you belong there. So walk in that. The job is yours. You've already secured it. The hard part is done. Now you can go and you can do your work with confidence. But then another thing that causes people to do people pleasing is there's a perfectionism that's also at work. Okay. Because you might be thinking, well, if I do everything myself, nothing will go wrong. Well, if you do everything yourself, something is inevitably going to go wrong. Okay. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, because you're not going to be able to do it all. You are not a one person team. Okay. So just cast that to the side. As a matter of fact, just throw it out altogether. Okay. And then what about the desire to be liked? So if you have a desire to be liked, you want to fit in, you want to belong, you want acceptance, well then that's what you do is you say yes to just about everything that is thrown at you because you want others to like you. Okay? But let me explain something else. They might like the leader who says yes to everything, and there's a reason for that, but they will definitely trust those who are clear and consistent and who know how to set boundaries. And another thing, when you put yourself in a position to always say yes because you're desiring people to like you, those who have ill intentions will take advantage of that and they will manipulate you. And I don't want you to be in a position where you are being manipulated because that's what people will do. And then another thing as to why we put ourselves in a position to people please is because we just have a fear of conflict. And yes, it is uncomfortable, but sometimes that's what's necessary. You're avoiding the emotions that you expect conflict to create. Okay. And this is even in the if the likelihood of it happening are non-existent. So when you fear the discomfort of tension so deeply that you are willing to sacrifice your peace, your well-being, your ability to complete things, and even your level of self-esteem and confidence. You're doing that so that you have this illusion of harmony right now today. Okay. Let me explain something to you. This pattern of behavior, it erodes the very foundation of effective leadership, which is ultimately what you want. And let me also explain this because I know that if you're people pleasing at work, you're also doing it in your personal life. Okay. And I want you to really consider that because what you're doing is you're burning the candle at both ends, personally and professionally. And so ultimately, you can't catch a break because your internal compass has long been calibrated to navigate the desires of other people. And what do you have to show for that? So then I want you to ask yourself, what is my motivation? Because whether you know it or not, or even believe it, people pleasing is self-serving. You might think that you are helping other people and that you are serving other people. And to some degree, there may be some truth in that. Okay. But ultimately, people pleasing is focused on preserving yourself. It is a defense mechanism designed to shield you from the perceived discomfort of conflict or even a fear of being misunderstood. So, by constantly bending to the expectations of other people, you're essentially curating a safe environment where you remain beyond reproach. It is really uncomfortable to have to tell somebody no. But I want you to remember that it's a full sentence. Okay. And, like I've stated, people pleasing is driven by a desire to keep the peace and get along. And those are not the only reasons why people do it, but that's just some of the main ones, right? But just about everybody has to deal with this at some point. And so I can tell you, even in my own experience, and this happened more than once, I've had to deal with the people pleasing as well, because again, there's a temptation for everybody to do it. And I received a request at work to provide a report. And the request was, hey, can you get this report to me within 2 hours? So, yeah, how did I feel about that? I felt a few things, and one of them was irritation. But I can tell you that the other thing that I felt was anxiety because I felt like there was this pressure. I put this pressure on myself of wanting to please because it was coming from an executive and I needed a win. I was, fairly new to the organization. And so I'm still trying to, get my bearings and show that I can do this job. So now I have this conflict between my professional boundaries and the desire to assist. And this created an awkward tension for me. But I had to think about this, okay? Because what I didn't want to do was set a precedent that it would be acceptable to send me last minute requests and then make it urgent for me to complete something that you knew that you needed weeks ago, right? So in that moment, I had a choice. Either I could comply with the demand and risk repeated demands, or I could push back and I could risk the perception of being unhelpful. Well, I can tell you that I chose the latter because I was not interested at all in setting a scenario where they thought that they could continue to do and make those kinds of requests. Okay. So what I did is I drafted a letter, or excuse me, an email, and I just let them know that I was concerned about the quality of the final deliverable. Okay. And so I didn't want him to think that this was about my personal convenience, but I wanted him to be aware, hey, I am more than happy to assist you in the future with a request. Please let me know at what time during the month you need this going forward, and I will make sure to have it for you by then. But I have other priorities that I have to tend to in the meantime. And so I'm unable to fulfill this request. Yeah. And so by shifting the focus to the integrity of the report, I transformed a potential point of friction into a collaborative discussion about operational efficiency. Do you see how I did that? And so part of the reason why that was so uncomfortable was again because I needed, or at least I thought that I needed to make a good impression because I was relatively new. That's really what it came down to. And so, in my opinion, there was this unspoken expectation that as a newcomer, oh, that you got to prove your value through immediate and unwavering availability. But how was I going to do that without doing it at the expense of my own boundaries? And so that's just one example. Again, it happens to people all the time. And so you might be experiencing this pretty regularly, and then you're left feeling guilty, anxious, and fearful. And by fearful, I mean fearful of disappointing other people or even being perceived as unhelpful or less capable than what you really are. Okay. So believe me, I know that's one of the worst feelings to experience professionally. So I definitely get it. But let me explain something else. Okay. The path to reclaiming your autonomy begins with recognizing that your worth is not tied to your capacity to continually say yes to every demand. All right. True professional growth stems from setting clear and intentional boundaries. And these things will honor both your well being and your contribution. And it will garner respect from your colleagues because they'll recognize that, hey, they're not just going to be able to cast something upon you at the last minute unless it's urgent. Okay. And please be aware. You have to understand your context because, yes, there are going to be times when you have to drop everything. And I think that you will know and understand when those times are. But I'm saying it as a general rule of thumb, it is not for you to continually overextend yourself to your detriment because you're not helping yourself. Okay. And the other people, they're receiving the benefit of you driving yourself harder and harder on a regular basis. Okay. So this is really where the transformation happens. When you begin to realize that boundaries are not barriers to success, they're the essential infrastructure that supports it. Okay. You have to reclaim your time. You have to create the space that's necessary so that you can produce the level of high quality work that you're known for. Okay. And so, really, this transition is going to require you to have some courage and it's going to challenge that ingrained habit of people pleasing that really has been masked as dedication. Okay. So, the discomfort of saying no is temporary. But the consequences of never saying no can have much longer implications. So with that said, you have some choices that you have to make. And I think that what you can do is start by auditing your current commitments. Okay. Identify the tasks that drain your energy without adding any meaningful value. And once you identify those, you want to consciously begin to cut away those activities to clear the path for your own priorities. And this is not about being selfish. This is not about telling everyone no every time they ask. This is you learning how to prioritize your functions, your tasks, your strategic ideas and work and deliverables. Okay? So you pause before you respond. Someone asks you to do something, you don't have to respond immediately. You can just leave it simply as, "Hey, let me get back to you once I've had an opportunity to review this request." It's as simple as that. Just breathe. It's okay. Okay. Another thing that you can do is you can replace no with prioritization. You could simply say, "Look, I can do that, but I have another project that I'm working on. And if you're willing to wait, we can do this." Or you can say something like, "You and tell me which one is the higher priority." Because, of course, it's going to depend on who your audience is. If your boss comes to you and tells you that something is urgent, well, then you already know what the priority is. But I'm just giving you some examples to help you navigate how to have those kinds of conversations. Okay. And then I want you to get comfortable disappointing people because it's definitely going to happen. And so be prepared for it because as a leader, sometimes you're going to have to disappoint people because, again, you cannot please everyone. All right. And let me state that I understand that company culture can encourage people pleasing. And sometimes they make it very difficult to say no. I get it. But this is where you have to decide whether to prioritize short term approval or long term influence. What is it that you're building toward? And what is it that you truly want? Okay. And so now you must determine what you're going to do to begin your transformation. And to help with that, I have a challenge for you. Okay. This is just a 24-hour boundary challenge. All you have to do is identify one task within the next 24 hours that you would typically handle out of habit. You would just automatically say yes. And I want you to notice what your internal reaction is and then simply say, "Let me get back to you after reviewing other priorities." Or something along those lines. I trust that you are perfectly capable of communicating the information, but I just want you to pause, okay? Just pause. That's your bridge from the reactive compliance to intentional leadership. You just want to delay it slightly. And by doing this, what you're doing is you're signaling to others that your contribution is deliberate rather than automatic. This is going to shift and fundamentally alter the power dynamic of your professional relationships. Okay. And so let me close with this. People pleasing often begins as a way to gain acceptance and avoid conflict or even prove your worth. But leadership is going to require something different from you. Okay. It's going to ask you to make decisions that serve the mission, not your need for approval, because that's not what it's about. The moment you stop managing other people's reactions and start managing your own priorities, then you move from people pleasing to leading people. Okay. And remember this question: how many donkeys are you carrying? Okay. Think about that. And be sure to share the episode and check out the additional episode links that I'm going to leave in the show notes for you. All right. Thanks for being here. Until next time, be thoughtful, be wise, be strategic, and remember, crossroads reveal who you are. Catalysts shape who you become. Every decision matters, so make it count. I'll talk to you next week.